Why did the room fall silent the moment she stepped inside? No one said her name. No one had to. The air around her carried a certain gravity, the kind that made even seasoned soldiers straighten subconsciously. She didn't look at any of them as she walked to the far side of the briefing table. Her boots barely made a sound on the polished concrete floor, but every step felt like an echo. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone else cleared their throat. Screens glowed dimly with satellite feeds building schematics and unreadable codes. A low hum from the ceiling lights filled the space between breaths. She didn't speak. Neither did they. They called her Vega, but that wasn't the name she was born with. It was the name she earned, the one whispered in places where paperwork vanished and missions went unacknowledged. Some said she chose it. Some said it was given to her. No one knew for sure because she never explained and they stopped asking years ago. The colonel at the front of the room kept his voice steady as he resumed the briefing, but his eyes kept drifting back to her, just like everyone else's. The objective is located in a restricted valley sector 3 clicks east of the marked zone. Entry will be. She didn't react. Her gaze stayed on the large digital map behind him, her face unreadable. She had that calm, that unnerving stillness that suggested she had already imagined the worst-case scenario and made peace with it before anyone else in the room even considered it. They all knew she'd been called in late, pulled from somewhere classified, somewhere not mentioned in her file. They also knew that meant one thing: this wasn't a mission anymore. This was a problem they couldn't solve without her. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. A young comms officer fumbled with the remote, flipping the screen to a grainy aerial shot of a structure half buried into a ridge. It looked ordinary enough: concrete walls, a steel roof, vehicles parked in a loose perimeter. But the silence in the room said otherwise. No one asked her why she was there. No one dared to wonder out loud why command pulled in someone who usually worked alone, someone who preferred to arrive after the dust had settled and the damage was already measured. She stood at the back of the room, hands behind her, posture controlled, not stiff, not tense, just measured. She remembered another room once, another table, another mission briefing with too many eyes and not enough certainty. The smell of ink on paper orders, the soft drag of her glove against a metal chair, a voice promising objectives that would be met, no matter the cost. She could still hear the quiet that followed, the unspoken things buried beneath standard procedure. Someone spoke up. "Ma'am, intel suggests 2 hostiles outside and unknown numbers inside, possible civilians." The voice belonged to Sergeant Hale. His tone tried to sound casual but cracked at the edges. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, just a glance, and then back to the map. He swallowed and looked down. The colonel hesitated before continuing. "This is voluntary assignment. Anyone uncomfortable with the conditions can withdraw." It was an unusual statement. Voluntary. That alone made a few heads tilt. No one stood up, but a few soldiers exchanged quick, uncertain glances. She didn't move, didn't blink. Whatever this mission was, she already knew she wasn't walking away from it. Not because of orders, not because someone expected her to. She owed something to this, something none of them could read on her face. Someone at the end of the table muttered, "What's she doing here?" Too quietly to be addressed but loud enough for the wrong ears. She heard it, she always heard everything, but she gave nothing back. Dignity didn't explain itself, it showed up whether welcomed or not. The colonel cleared his throat and looked directly at her. "We'd appreciate your assessment before deployment." She stepped forward with a calm that didn't feel rehearsed. It felt lived in. She studied the details on the screen, the terrain, the angles, the access routes. Her eyes shifted slightly when she reached the interior blueprint. Something in the layout triggered a flicker of recognition, but it vanished before anyone could name it. She finally spoke, her voice low, steady. "If those entry points are guarded, they won't be obvious. They'll want to funnel us toward a trap. The northeast ridge offers better approach under crosswind. Nobody interrupted. Every word she gave felt deliberate, never wasted. They'll expect noise, she continued. Don't give it to them. A pause followed, not awkward, not hostile, just thick with meaning. Then she added something unexpected. Someone inside isn't meant to be found. That made the colonel flinch almost imperceptibly. Explain. She didn't, not yet. A shadow of memory passed through her mind, two sets of coordinates she once memorized, a voice over a broken radio link, a promise she never got to keep. It wasn't this mission, but it was close enough to hurt. Hale stared at her with something caught between doubt and admiration. You've seen this setup before. She didn't answer the question directly. Patterns repeat. People don't change as fast as they think. Someone scratched their pen against paper. Someone else whispered something about access codes. Her presence made everything feel like it mattered more. Failure felt closer when she was in the room, not because she caused it, but because she'd seen it too many times. She stepped back again, letting the colonel continue. He glanced at his notes as if they suddenly felt smaller than the mission itself. Team deployment at 400, night approach, adaptive silence protocols. He hesitated, then added, we move as one. She knew that was a lie. They wouldn't move as one. Some would hesitate. Some would look for instructions. Some wouldn't understand what kind of mission this really was. And one of them, at least one, would break. But she didn't voice that. The meeting wrapped with restrained relief. Chairs slid back, boots scuffed, papers gathered. No one looked directly at her longer than a second. She didn't need their comfort. She didn't need their welcome. She had walked through too many doors like this to expect either. As the room emptied, Hale lingered near the table. You think Intel is wrong about the numbers inside. She didn't look at him. Intel is always wrong, just a matter of degrees. He nodded like he understood, even though he didn't. You'll be leading the breach, right? She finally met his gaze. I'll go where I need to. He didn't press. He left soon after, but not before glancing back, as if he wanted to ask something else, something human, but didn't know how. When the room was nearly empty, she stood in front of the screen again, alone. Her eyes traced the ridge, the walls, the approach route. Her breathing stayed even, but in her chest, something old stirred like a wound that never learned to scar properly. There was a name she hadn't spoken in years, a name connected to a mission classified beyond clearance, and a promise that had cost her more than anyone ever knew. She touched the edge of the table with her fingertips, grounding herself. They thought she was there to lead the operation. They thought command sent her to ensure success. But the truth was quieter and heavier. She wasn't there for the mission. She was there for one person. And if she found them inside that structure, the orders wouldn't matter. Outside the briefing room, the hallway buzzed softly with footsteps, clipped conversations, and the metallic ring of equipment being prepped. She stepped into that movement like a ghost, sliding back into a world that had forgotten her face but remembered her reputation. No one stopped her, no one asked her anything. She walked past them all, carrying a purpose none of them could see, and a truth she wouldn't reveal. Not yet. Because some truths don't march for applause. They wait in silence until the moment they are forced to act. What made her stop just before the door slid shut behind her? The hallway was nearly empty now, just the distant shuffle of movement around the prep bays and the hum of recycled air flickering through overhead vents. She didn't break stride, but there was a shift in her posture, barely visible, like a shadow adjusting itself to the light. Something had registered. A sound, a pattern, a memory pressing against the present. She kept walking. Past the reinforced glass panels where technicians moved around crates of gear, stamped with codes even they didn't fully understand. Past the narrow windows slit into concrete walls, catching flashes of floodlights outside the perimeter. Past rows of lockers where soldiers half-dressed in gear spoke in low voices. not realizing how loudly their doubts bled through silence. No one called her name. Some looked up, then looked away quickly. Others pretended not to notice her at all. She preferred that. Attention was noise. Noise got people killed. She didn't go to the barracks. She never did before an op. Instead, she cut through a corridor most personnel didn't use unless they were avoiding someone. The path led to a smaller armory annex where clearance checks were done by retinal scan, not keycard. The guard on duty didn't speak when she approached. He just stepped aside and pretended not to wonder why she didn't carry anything in. Inside, the room was quiet enough to hear the low tick of a ventilation fan. Racks of rifles lined one wall. Cases of sidearms and suppressors sat locked inside heavy drawers. Monitors flickered with biometric logs. But she didn't move toward the weapons immediately. She walked to a narrow metal cabinet tucked behind a row of armored vests. She unlocked it with a code no one had given her. The moment the latch clicked, something in her eyes shifted. Inside was a different kind of quiet, one lined with things not meant for shared missions. She lifted a matte black case from the second shelf and placed it on the narrow table. The latches opened with a sound that felt too loud in a room like this. Inside lay a sidearm, customized, worn at the edges, marked with faint etchings only visible under angled light. Its weight held history. She didn't reach for it yet. Instead, a folded piece of cloth caught her eye beneath the weapon. She froze, not visibly, not to anyone else, but internally something tightened. The cloth was faded, creased, beige once, now closer to the color of old sand. She removed it carefully and unfolded it halfway. Her thumb brushed across a stitched name, barely legible now. She stopped before revealing the rest. Footsteps approached the door. She refolded the cloth and slid it back into the case, then closed the lid and locked it in a single movement. When the door opened, she was standing with her back turned, already selecting a suppressed weapon from the rack. It was Hale. He hesitated when he saw her. "Didn't think you came down here yourself," he said, his voice light, like he was testing the air around the words. She didn't reply. She loaded a magazine with gloves on, each round pressed into place with quiet precision. He lingered by the doorway. "The rest of the team in prep thought you'd be." She set the magazine aside and finally met his eyes. He tensed, then straightened like he remembered he was supposed to stand taller around her. Something in her expression made him lower his tone. "Colonel wants a final team brief in 30. He said he'd wait on you." She nodded once, picking up the sidearm she'd chosen from the wall. "I'll be there." He didn't leave. "You've done ops like this before, yeah?" He tried to sound casual, but the question held weight. "With this many unknowns." "Unknowns are usually the only honest part," she said. A half-smile flickered across his face before dying quietly. "The others keep asking about the objective. They think there's more to it." She holstered the weapon and turned away. "There always is." When she brushed past him on the way out, he caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Not fear, not anger. Something older. Something that made him want to ask who she was before she became this. But the moment passed before he found the courage. In the adjoining corridor, two medics stood by a supply trolley, sorting gauze and IV packs. One of them, a woman with tired eyes, stopped mid-motion as Vega passed. She didn't speak, but there was recognition there, maybe not of identity, but of type. The kind of soldier who'd seen too much and learned to carry silence like armor. Further down, a young logistics officer nearly collided with her, then froze when he realized who he'd almost walked into. "Ma'am, sorry, didn't see." He stepped aside so quickly he knocked over a case of comm units. She didn't look back. When she reached the central operations bay, most of the team was already there. Gear laid out, packs half-sealed, vests on. They avoided staring at her directly, but their awareness sharpened. Respect mixed with unease. Not hostility, just the kind of caution people show when walking near the edge of something deep and unknown. The colonel stood by a projected terrain overlay, pretending to review coordinates he had already memorized. When he saw her, he didn't greet her. He simply gestured toward the display. We've confirmed two probable sentry positions. Thermal scans suggest movement deeper underground. No further signals. She studied the map. Hale moved closer, arms crossed, scanning her face for clues. Someone behind them, a rifleman named Carter, asked quietly, "You think they'll negotiate if we corner them?" She didn't turn. People who build traps don't ask for terms. Carter shifted uncomfortably. Was worth asking. The colonel cleared his throat. Deployment window is tight. Transport moves at 3:30. Insertion zone is low visibility. You'll land east of the ridge, cross on foot. Everyone nodded, but their bodies betrayed the tension. Fingers tapping, boots shifting, shoulders set tight. She didn't sit. She didn't take notes. Everything she needed, she'd already committed to memory before most of them understood what the terrain meant. A drone operator stepped forward with a tablet. These are the last high-res stills from above the ridge. Someone covered part of the roof with thermal shielding in the last 48 hours. That wasn't in earlier scans. She took the tablet, studied the images, then handed it back. Someone's expecting company. That landed heavily in the room. Silence settled again, the familiar kind, the one that doesn't ask permission to stay. The colonel's gaze lingered on her. Final check-in before we move. If there's anything you need to disclose or adjust, now's the time. She looked at him for a long beat, and something passed between them that the rest of the team couldn't decode. He blinked first. She spoke evenly. "There's someone inside who won't show on scans. If we find them, they aren't part of your extraction criteria." Murmurs stirred, the colonel stiffened. Identity. She didn't answer, not with words. The silence said enough. One of the team, a demolitions tech named Wren, spoke before he could stop himself. "So this is a retrieval op." She didn't look at him. "You focus on your assignment, I'll handle mine." Wren opened his mouth like he wanted to object, but Hale shook his head once beside him. "Not now." The colonel didn't argue. Maybe because he knew better. Maybe because whatever authority he held on paper didn't apply to ghosts like her. Team members began dispersing to finalize packs and loadouts. She remained for a few seconds longer, then turned and stepped away, cutting through the bay with the steadiness of someone who had walked into worse and walked out unchanged, at least on the surface. Outside the bay, Hale caught up again. "You're not putting this team at risk for a personal objective, are you?" She stopped, slowly turned. For the first time, something almost like anger flickered across her features, but it wasn't directed at him. "If I were, you wouldn't be here to ask." He swallowed and stepped back. She resumed walking. As she headed toward the lower prep wing, a memory rose without permission. Cool night air, the sound of rotors, someone's voice over comms saying, "If this goes wrong, don't come back for me." She hadn't agreed then, she still didn't. She entered the locker room assigned to her, an isolated space with a narrow bench, a single overhead light, and a steel sink with a mirror above it. Her reflection stared back, calm and detached. She removed her jacket, unstrapped her belt, checked every seam and weapon with practiced precision. On the bench sat a folded strip of fabric she'd kept tucked inside the inner lining of her pack. The same cloth she'd touched earlier. She unfolded it now, tracing the stitched name again. Just one touch, just one breath. Then she folded it and secured it inside a hidden pocket of her vest. Not for luck. For accountability. She heard footsteps again, lighter this time, a knock or two soft raps on the doorframe. It was the medic from earlier holding a small pouch. "You left this in the comms bay earlier." She didn't make eye contact, didn't want anyone else touching it. Vega took it without a word. The medic hesitated, then said quietly, "People aren't ignoring you, they're holding their breath." Vega paused just for a second. The medic's voice softened. "I've seen soldiers like you before. The ones who don't come back for applause, just don't go in alone even if you think you have to." She left before Vega could reply. The door closed. The room felt smaller now, but not confined, just focused. She checked her watch. 2 hours and 10 minutes until transport. 2 hours and 10 minutes until she stepped back into a place that felt more like memory than mission. And somewhere in that valley, beneath concrete and dust and silence, the past waited, unseen, unresolved, and not forgotten. Not by her. Not by the one she came for. Not by the truth she had carried alone for too long. Why did the quiet feel heavier right before departure? The corridor outside the prep wing stretched ahead in muted steel and shadow, its walls lined with gear lockers and sealed crates stamped with codes that meant nothing to anyone without clearance. She moved through it without sound, vest secured, sidearm holstered, hair tied back with the kind of precision that looked unthinking but was anything but. She didn't rush. She never did. Time had its own rhythm around her, the kind that bent instead of pressed. Down the hall, Hale stood with Carter and Wren at a supply station, checking final straps and scopes. Their voices dropped almost to whispers when they saw her approaching, not out of disrespect, not out of fear, something else. Something they couldn't define but felt anyway. Carter's hand paused mid-adjustment on his rifle sling. Wren looked away first. Hale was the only one who kept his eyes steady. "Transport, fueling. We move in 20. She didn't nod, she simply kept walking. They fell silent again. The hangar doors were partially open, letting in a thin slice of pre-dawn cold that cut through the warm interior air. Outside, darkness still claimed most of the desert horizon, broken only by the white glare of mounted floodlights and the distant flicker of signal towers. The world felt like it was holding its breath. 2 transport vehicles sat ready, matte black, armored, engines running low and steady. A third one idled further back, loaded with drone carriers and med-evac kits, though no one said out loud why that one might be needed. As she stepped into the hangar, she caught sight of something that made her pause, not visibly but within. A mechanic knelt by the lead vehicle, tightening a latch near the front wheel. His face was half covered by a grease-marked cloth, but for a second, the angle of his shoulders, the way he leaned, sparked something old in her memory. Not him, someone else, somewhere else. A night with no stars and a promise swallowed by gunfire. The memory vanished before it fully formed, leaving an ache instead of an image. She moved on. Inside the staging bay, a logistics officer approached with a clipboard he didn't actually need. "Ma'am, your comm frequency is verified and linked to command. Secure channel set under designation Talon 3. Your personal relay is synced to your..." She walked past him without taking the device. He stopped mid-sentence, glanced around, then set the relay unit quietly on the edge of a gear crate in case she chose to take it later. She wouldn't. Hale caught up beside her again. "You're not wearing an uplink." "I don't need one. It's standard protocol." She turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. "So is failure." He didn't argue after that. A voice buzzed from the overhead intercom, calm, filtered, official. "Final load check. All teams to staging markers. 5-minute lockdown begins." The team assembled without being told. Carter tested his comm line. Wren resecured the breaching kit. 2 others, Lennox and Ortiz, stood by the rear vehicle, names stitched across their vests, faces set in that expression soldiers wear when they're imagining what could go wrong but pretending not to. The medic from earlier walked past with a field pack over one shoulder. She didn't say anything to Vega, but their eyes met for a second. That was enough. As the engines revved a little higher, someone spoke behind her, quiet, almost an afterthought. "You ever think about not coming back from one of these?" It was Lennox. He hadn't meant for her to hear it, but his words weren't aimed at anyone in particular, just at the air. Wren answered without looking at him. Thinking about it doesn't change the odds. But it changes something, Lennox murmured. I don't know what, but something. Vega stepped toward the side of the transport vehicle, one hand resting briefly along the edge before she climbed in. Her eyes scanned the interior. Benches, overhead grips, crates of sealed equipment, straps that rattled slightly with engine vibration. She sat at the forward end of the bench, facing the exit hatch. No one sat across from her. They took the other side, leaving her space that felt intentional. Hale climbed in last and pulled the rear door shut. The locking seal thumped into place. For a moment, the only sound was the steady purr of the engine beneath their boots. Then it happened, barely a noise, more like a shift in the air. She turned her head slightly. No one else seemed to notice. A tiny vibration against the back of her wrist. She reached under her glove and touched the thin band wrapped there. Not standard issue. Not recent. One of the only things she kept from before everything changed. The vibration came again. Not an alert, not a message. A timer. She closed her fist around it. 1 second, 2, then it stopped. Carter watched her for a moment longer than he meant to. Noticing, perhaps, that she wasn't wearing what anyone else wore. Noticing she carried things differently. But he turned away before his curiosity could take shape. The transport lurched forward, smooth but forceful, rolling out of the hangar and into the cold dark beyond. No one spoke for a while. The driver called back over comms, ETA to drop point 23 minutes. Secondary route is clear, wind factor minimal. Wren muttered, minimal until it is. Ortiz fiddled with the strap of her helmet. You think we'll see movement before ingress? No one answered her. Vega watched through the narrow window slit, eyes tracking nothing and everything. The world outside blurred in strips of pale light and moving shadow. The engines grew quieter as the terrain shifted from hard pavement to unpaved rock. Hale finally spoke, low enough not to break the uneasy calm. You said someone inside won't show on scans. If we come across them, do we engage, extract, or avoid? She kept her gaze forward. You do your job, I'll do mine. That wasn't the question. It was the answer. He leaned back against the wall of the transport and exhaled quietly, accepting that pushing further would get him nothing but silence. Minutes passed in the way they often do before impact, with edges sharpened and thoughts louder than sound. The memory she'd fought earlier returned without warning this time. Rain, a broken calm line, a voice whispering through static, if I don't make it, don't carry me with you. She had ignored it then. She was still ignoring it now. The transport slowed, then stopped. The rear door unlocked with a muted click. The pre-dawn cold spilled in like fog. The driver appeared in the opening. Ridge line is 200 meters north. Approach is dead ground. No aerial glare. Hale stood checking his rifle. We move now. On your mark. They filed out one by one, boots sinking into a mix of loose earth and frost. Breath curled into the air in slow clouds. The sky had begun to gray at the edges, but the sun hadn't claimed it yet. She was the last to step down. The ground felt different under her boots. Not the way it felt for them. For them, it was foreign territory. For her, it was familiar, too familiar. A second transport rumbled somewhere behind them, then cut its engine. Distant voices carried briefly, then fell off. They formed up loosely, avoiding tight clusters. Hale signaled forward movement. The team advanced, low and fast, toward the shadow of the ridge. Wind slid across the rock in soft, uneven breaths. The silence wasn't empty. It was layered with intent. Halfway to the ridge, Carter whispered, "You hear that?" Wren froze. Ortiz crouched lower. Vega didn't stop walking. Carter listened harder. Thought I heard, never mind. Hale glanced at her. You're certain the perimeter's active? She didn't look at him. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be here. No one argued. They reached the ridge line, its jagged edge rising like a scar against the pale light. They flattened along the incline, scanning the structure below through low-light scopes. There it was, the same concrete and steel they'd seen on the screen in the briefing room. But from this angle, it felt alive. A place that breathed in secrets and exhaled consequences. Thermal views showed only two forms outside, one by the main entry, one patrolling near a comms tower. Too easy. Hale's jaw worked. Doesn't match earlier chatter, they're positioned wrong. They're watching the wrong approach, Vega said. Ren frowned, which means they think they know where we'll come from. They do, she replied. Then we're walking into an ambush, Carter muttered. No, she said quietly, they are. The way she said it made the wind seem to pause. She lowered her pack and knelt, drawing something from a side compartment, something small, compact, wrapped in matte cloth. Hale watched. What is that? She didn't answer immediately. Inside the wrap was a device they didn't recognize, not standard, not listed. She held it gently, thumb brushing its edge like a memory. She looked toward the structure with that still gaze again. This place wasn't built for defense, she said softly. It was built for erasure. Ren looked sharply at her. Erasure of what? She didn't blink. People. The team exchanged glances, unease threading through their formation like a wire. Before anyone could ask more, a burst of comms crackled faintly through Hale's earpiece, command checking in, unaware of the weight crawling just beneath the surface. He ignored it. Vega rose, the device now secured inside her vest. Hale stepped closer. If you're withholding. I'm not withholding, she said. Then what are you doing? She looked him in the eye, and for the first time something close to sorrow surfaced and vanished. I'm finishing something I didn't get to finish before. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't ask again. The ridge held its breath with them. And somewhere beneath that cold earth and silent concrete, a truth waited, not to be found but to be reckoned with. Why did the ground seem to remember things people tried to bury? The question slid through her mind as the wind scraped across the ridge, colder now, heavier, like it carried echoes instead of air. She didn't move yet. Neither did he. The others were scattered in their positions, unaware that silence sometimes had weight, and tonight it pressed on everything. Her eyes scanned the valley below, not for movement but for memory. There was an outline in the land that most wouldn't see, buildings rebuilt over the bones of something older, roads paved across scars, and beneath it, her unfinished business. A voice cracked over comms, low, routine, oblivious. Movement in Sector 3 could be nothing, could be something. He spoke with the brittle calm of someone hopping not to be right. She didn't answer immediately. Her thumb tapped against the side of her glove, not in impatience but in habit, counting seconds, breaths, odds. The man beside her, Tomas, glanced at her profile as though he might catch a hint of what she was thinking. He didn't. Call it, he said, softer than before. She did. We move in too. Quiet entry, no lights. There was no argument. There never was when she used that tone, a kind of stillness sharp enough to be a command. Her unit adjusted positions like pieces on a board none of them fully understood, except her. She stood, snow crunching under her boots, and the world around her seemed to contract. The ridge, the wind, the low hum of radio static, they curved inward as if bracing. Tomas followed a step behind. He didn't ask where they were heading. He didn't realize he was walking into the shadow of someone else's history. Down the slope the structure came into view. Not a base, not a bunker. An old civilian facility reclaimed for something no one officially named. Concrete walls sanded down by time but still bearing the faint geometric outlines of what it used to be. A comms relay, decades retired, or so the maps claimed. The team regrouped by the outer perimeter. Mateo, their systems guy, knelt near a rusted panel half hidden by frost. The others watched the tree line, breaths ghosting in air too still. "This place isn't flagged," Tomas muttered into his mic. "It was once," she replied. She didn't explain how she knew. She didn't explain that she remembered the silhouette of the building in the dark long before satellites rendered it obsolete. No one had erased it from the land, only from the reports. Mateo pried open the corroded access plate with a muted snap. "Power's dead, manual override only." He glanced up, expecting a decision. She was already moving. "North wall has a secondary access, under the venting column." He blinked. "How do you?" "2 minutes," she cut in. No challenge. He nodded and got to work rerouting his kit toward the location she named. Tomas stayed close to her, though he didn't speak. He was starting to understand that she wasn't guessing. Snow thickened, falling in slanted, silent threads as they moved along the wall. Each footstep was placed with intention, no wasted motion. She traced her gloved fingers along the concrete as though reading its pulse. The vent column came into view, half-buried, inconspicuous, nearly claimed by dirt and ice. She knelt. Not to examine it. To remember. A fragment of sound slipped through her memory: boots, a locked door, a voice she once trusted telling her to wait outside. She hadn't, and that choice had rewritten everything after. Mateo arrived with his pack. "Cover me," he said quietly, already setting instruments against the metal. Tomas watched her. He wanted to ask, but something about her posture, steady, unblinking, made silence seem smarter. The latch gave after 40 seconds, too quick for something abandoned, too smooth for something forgotten. Mateo stiffened. This was maintained. Someone been here within the year. She nodded once. "Within the month." "How?" She didn't finish. The vent door, rectangular and narrow as a coffin lid, gave way with a muted thud. Cold air wept from the dark. "Lena," Tomas said her name low, as if trying it on for the first time. "We don't have full recon on this grid. Command thinks this sector is." "They're wrong," she said, and her voice held no heat, only fact. "Then why not tell them? Why not report the—" "Because they'll ask questions they don't understand how to hear." He let that sit. Behind them, 2 more of their team members took up security angles, eyes sharp. The night leaned closer. Mateo clicked a small light on, aimed it down the shaft. A tight crawl space leading into darkness that sloped deeper than expected. He exhaled. This wasn't in any schematic. "It was," she said, "a long time ago." He stared. Tomas stared. She didn't elaborate. The team lead, on paper that was Tomas, but not here, not now, gave the go. "Mateo, Lena, take primary entry. I'll follow. Everyone else hold perimeter, no noise." No one called her by rank. No one called her anything but Lena, like saying it too formally might break the spell of how she worked. She slid into the shaft first, feet first, then twisting to descend. The walls were tight, metal slick with condensation and silt, the taste of rust thinning in the back of her throat. She didn't flinch. Her breath stayed low, rhythm unchanged. Mateo followed, struggling more with the confined drop. Tomas waited till they cleared the space below before entering. They landed inside a chamber barely taller than a man, narrow and receding into pitch-black corridors. Their lights flicked on minimal beams, no spill. Dust on the floor, but not enough. Marks where someone had passed recently. More than one someone. Mateo crouched, tracing the faint depressions left in the dirt. 3, maybe 4 individuals. Could be old, but... "They're not old," she cut in. He looked up, watching her scan the walls, the angles, the faint seams in the concrete. She moved like someone greeting a place she had walked through in another life. Tomas whispered, "You've been here." She didn't answer, which was in itself the answer. They advanced. The deeper they went, the less the air smelled of time and more of purpose. Someone had cleared debris. Someone had widened paths that shouldn't have been accessible. Someone had kept the facility breathing in the dark. Tomas keyed his comms. Perimeter stable. No heat signatures top level, proceeding internal with caution. The reply crackled, indifferent. The ones above weren't trained to notice ghosts. They reached a central access chamber, a hub with 3 branching hallways and an old operations console stripped of screens. Cables hung like veins cut loose. She paused, letting the silence settle. Mateo stepped toward the left corridor. "I'll sweep." "No," she said sharply. He froze. She pointed to the corridor opposite. "That way first." Tomas studied her. "Why that one?" Her eyes flicked to the floor. There was a symbol etched into the concrete, nearly erased by time. Barely there, but she knew it. Not military, not official, something older. Something she'd once memorized because someone told her it didn't matter. She started walking without explaining. They followed. The corridor sloped downward and the air turned colder, not from weather but vacancy. Every few meters she checked the walls, fingertips ghosting across metal seams. She stopped once, not out of doubt but recognition. "Here." She knelt again, brushing dust aside. Beneath it, barely visible, a thin patch of concrete that didn't match the rest. A repair job, crude, rushed. Mateo leaned in. "What is that?" She didn't answer him. Instead, she said, "Give me the thermal reader." He handed it over. Her hands were steady as she pressed it to the surface. The result was low, uneven. Something was beneath it, something dense. Tomas crouched beside her. "Lena, what are we walking into?" She stared at the floor a beat too long. "A promise," she said quietly, "one that didn't keep itself." Before he could ask, a sound rippled faintly down the corridor behind them. Not boots, not movement, pressure like a breath in reverse. Tomas signaled reflexively, and Mateo killed his light. Darkness swallowed them. No one moved. Seconds bled. Then faintly the noise again, closer now but not approaching, like something alive but trapped behind walls. Mateo swallowed. "I don't like that." "You're not supposed to," she murmured. Tomas exhaled once. "We need to decide. Do we breach that floor or fall back and report?" She shook her head even though he could barely see her. "No one up there will open it. They'll seal it. Again." "Why?" Her voice was calm, too calm. "Because the last time they opened it, 6 people disappeared, and the record says it was a collapse." Mateo's eyes widened in the dark. "You were part of that." "No," her whisper was the coldest thing in the room. "I was the one who made it out." Silence thickened. She placed the thermal reader down and unshouldered her pack. "Help me cut through." Tomas hesitated. Mateo hesitated. But only one of them asked, "What exactly are we expecting to find?" She met his gaze through the dark, eyes catching the faintest glint of reflected light. "Something I buried, and something someone else came back to claim." He didn't ask again. The ridge no longer held its breath. They were too deep for it to hear any more. And above them, where the snow kept secrets, the night waited, not in ignorance but in warning. She set the cutter to the concrete, the hiss of silent sparks muted by dust and age. And as the first line broke open, a draft of air escaped, warm, impossibly warm, like something below had been remembering them too. She paused just long enough for Tomas to notice. Then she kept cutting. Not out of hope. Out of debt. Then she kept cutting. Not out of hope. Out of debt. The concrete gave way in faint, reluctant pieces, dust curling into the narrow shaft like smoke from a candle no one dared light. Her gloves were scorched at the edges, fingers raw from pressure, but she didn't flinch. Each line she cut carved a path not just into the building, but into the past she had carried alone for years. Tomas crouched behind her, holding a compact light and scanning the shadowed corridor. Mateo's breathing was shallow, hands poised over instruments, waiting for her signal. Neither spoke. Words would have been noise. Noise was dangerous here. The first crack widened enough for a glimpse, an opening, narrow, framed by jagged edges. Warm air escaped in a subtle puff, carrying a scent of metal, earth, and something faintly human. She inhaled, steady, aware that her pulse drummed in quiet defiance of the fear she refused to acknowledge. "This is it," she whispered. Not to them, not for them. She wasn't sharing, she was claiming. Tomas shifted slightly, voice low. "You think whoever or whatever is in there still alive?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the darkness beyond the gap. The air shimmered faintly, distorted by heat and shadow. She could feel the presence before she saw it, like the memory of a heartbeat echoing through a tunnel. Her jaw set. "I don't know, but I'll know in seconds." Mateo exhaled, fingers tightening around the side of the shaft. "If it's a trap." "It is," she said simply, cutting him off. Her tone left no room for argument. "Everything worth finding is a trap." They slid through the opening carefully, each movement measured, each step silent. The corridor beyond was narrower than expected, barely enough for two people side by side. Dust hung in the air, catching the faint beam from Mateo's portable light. The walls were etched with old symbols, half erased, some familiar, some unreadable. She traced them lightly with her gloved fingertips, feeling the weight of histories she wasn't supposed to remember. Tomas followed closely, glancing around at every corner. His own training told him to scan for threats, but instinct and fear told him to watch her. She moved like she belonged here, like she had walked these halls before, carrying memories no one else had lived. At the corridor's end, a reinforced door blocked the path. Scars lined its surface, scratches, dents, faint bloodstains worn by time. She crouched slightly, eyeing the locking mechanism. A manual override but tampered with. Evidence someone had been meticulous, hiding whatever lay beyond from prying eyes. She knelt, pulling a compact toolkit from her vest. Fingers danced over the panel with a rhythm born of repetition, years of practice, each adjustment precise. Sparks flared faintly in the darkness. The team held its breath. One false move and the entire place could collapse, or worse, awaken the unseen threat inside. "Almost," she murmured, each word measured like a countdown. A soft click. The door shifted. A rush of warm air escaped, carrying a scent that made her pause for a fraction of a heartbeat. Candle wax, damp earth, faint iron, familiar, haunting, human. She motioned for Tomas to cover her left flank. Mateo held the light steady, revealing the room beyond. It was small, square, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Dust motes floated lazily in the thin light, and in the corner, huddled beneath a thin tarp, someone, or something, stirred. "Stay back," she whispered, glancing at Tomas and Mateo. But even as she said it, her own body moved forward instinctively. Her hands unfastened the tarp with care. The figure beneath it stirred fully, and then the light caught a face. It was him, or rather what remained of him, eyes wide, pale, frail, but alive. Recognition flared instantly, unspoken, a wordless acknowledgement of debt owed, promises broken, and the years that had passed without closure. "Tobias." Her voice was barely audible, cracked with the weight of memory and suppressed emotion. He blinked slowly, confusion, relief, fear, all tangled in a single breath. "Vega." I. She knelt beside him, carefully checking for injuries. His body was weak, emaciated from confinement, but the heartbeat was there, faint, stubborn. "You survived," she said quietly, almost to herself. "After all these years." He tried to speak, but no words formed. His lips trembled, as if they were rediscovering their function after being silenced by time. "You're alive," she repeated more firmly. "That's all that matters now." Mateo cleared his throat softly behind them. "Should we move him?" She glanced back, scanning the corridor. "Not yet. We need to secure the room, then we move fast. One mistake and," her jaw tightened, "and it ends here." Tomas placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Are you sure about this? You've carried him this long, what if?" "No," she interrupted. "No more waiting. No more letting them write the story for us. I'm finishing this." The team moved as she indicated, securing the narrow room's entrance, checking for traps and secondary mechanisms. Dust shifted under their boots, soft warnings that spoke louder than alarms. She crouched beside Tobias again, taking his hand gently. It was cold, brittle under her fingers, but real, alive. She could feel the debt settle, not vanish, but transform into something actionable. She didn't say anything. Words weren't needed. This was closure. This was reckoning. The flickering bulb overhead illuminated a faint smile on his lips. Recognition, gratitude. Fear still lingered, but it was quieter now, softened by relief. She straightened, scanning the shadows beyond the doorway. Her team waited, tense but ready. The ridge, the cold night, the long path they had walked, everything had led to this moment. And she understood, finally, that dignity wasn't in applause. It was in seeing what no one else could, carrying it, and acting when it mattered most. "Let's go," she whispered. Tobias nodded weakly. Together they began the careful crawl back to the corridor, every step measured, every breath quiet. Outside, the ridge awaited. The world above remained oblivious to the small, personal triumph unfolding below. Snow swirled in gentle patterns, masking footprints, hiding secrets, as if nature itself conspired to protect the fragile outcome of human endurance. Mateo and Tomas flanked them, eyes alert, but glances occasionally shifted toward her. Not for leadership, no one questioned that anymore, but for the silent strength she carried, the resolve that had guided them here. She thought briefly of all the missions that had come before, all the ghosts she had buried along the way. Every time she had walked past the world without recognition, without applause. It all led to this: one life retrieved, one promise kept, one debt paid in full. As they moved toward the exit, the flickering light behind them cast long shadows on the walls, and she understood the truth she had carried all these years. Some missions aren't about victory. Some missions are about seeing the unseen, acting when no one is watching, and surviving so that the story of dignity is told quietly in the spaces between action and silence. The night held them in its quiet embrace as they ascended, careful, steady. The ridge above was waiting, but she felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. She glanced at Tobias, still fragile but breathing, and for a fraction of a moment allowed herself a private relief, a silent acknowledgement that she had kept her promise. They reached the outer edge of the complex, frost crunching under boots, engines rumbling faintly in the distance as their transport remained on standby. The snow softened the edges of the world, masking their approach, hiding their triumph from those who might have sought to undo it. And for once she allowed herself to look outward over the ridge at the rising pale light of dawn. A new day, not for glory, not for recognition, but for truth, for someone who had been forgotten. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She turned back to her team, each face showing relief, tension, exhaustion. Not one of them said a word. They didn't need to. The story had been lived, the debt settled. And above all, the ridge held its breath, no longer in anticipation but in quiet witness. And she understood finally. The mission wasn't over, but this chapter, this reckoning, was hers alone. The wind had changed when they emerged from the complex. It wasn't the same cold air that had whispered through the shaft or brushed against the ridge. It was sharper, carrying grit and the faint tang of metal from the distant facility above. Snowflakes caught in her hair, in Tobias's matted strands, in the folds of her vest. They weren't significant, not yet, but they reminded her that the world had not paused for her to catch her breath. She signaled for Tomas and Mateo to lead Tobias gently toward the transport. Each step was careful, deliberate. He wavered, weak from years of confinement, and for the first time in what felt like decades, she noticed how fragile life could be. Fragile, yet persistent. The transport's ramp lowered with a metallic groan. Lights inside were dim, ready for extraction but not for ceremony. Soldiers climbed in first, securing their gear, securing themselves. She lifted Tobias with care, arms braced under his shoulders and knees, and guided him into the vehicle. He coughed softly, a dry, rattling sound, and blinked at the ceiling, the corners of his mind catching up with his senses after a lifetime spent in shadow. Hale was already inside, scanning, waiting. When she stepped in, he nodded once, not approval, not command, just acknowledgement. The kind that had come too rarely, yet mattered more than anything else. The door closed. Engines hummed. The vehicle shuddered as it began to move, carrying them back across frozen terrain. Silence settled over the team, heavier than before. It wasn't fear or tension. It was reflection, the kind that followed reckoning. She felt it in the taut muscles along her back, in Tobias's faint tremble, in Mateo's careful monitoring of his instruments. Even Tomas, usually bristling with alertness, was subdued. Finally she broke the quiet. Check his vitals, make sure nothing was missed, no assumptions. Her voice was low, steady, commanding but without the hardness she often carried. Compassion weighed in the inflection she rarely allowed herself. Mateo moved quickly, checking Tobias's pulse, oxygen, heart rate. Numbers were weak but stable. The man had survived years in confinement, hidden from the world, and still, he breathed. Tomas crouched beside her. "You didn't tell anyone about him," he said softly. "Not command, not the team. Why?" She glanced at him, eyes steady, unflinching. "Because some things aren't theirs to decide, some debts aren't theirs to settle, and some missions aren't about the mission." He nodded slowly, understanding even if he couldn't articulate it. "You carry too much." "Too much is relative," she murmured. Her gaze drifted to Tobias, resting quietly under a thin blanket. His face was pale, eyes closed, but the faint rise and fall of his chest spoke of life, of survival, of unfinished stories waiting to be reclaimed. The vehicle moved faster now, taking them across terrain that had been mapped countless times but felt different under the weight of secrecy and survival. Every bump, every creak of metal reminded her that extraction was only the beginning. The world didn't wait for closure. It demanded forward motion. Her mind drifted, unwillingly, back to the ridge, to the moment when she had cut through concrete not for hope, not for glory, but for debt, for someone who had been left behind, for the promise that someone had whispered long ago, one she had never been able to forget: "If I don't make it, don't carry me with you." She had carried him anyway, not because she had to, but because she could, because dignity had no audience. A faint vibration buzzed against her wrist, the tracker she hadn't removed. A reminder that command was monitoring, that they expected a report, that the extraction wasn't complete until they crossed the line back to controlled territory. She silenced it without a glance. Some debts weren't to be reported. Some victories weren't to be recorded. Some truths existed only in the quiet moments between action and recognition. Hale's voice cut softly through the hum of the vehicle. "We're approaching a checkpoint. Eyes up. We don't know if anyone's been watching." She nodded, scanning the terrain through the side slit. Faint movement in the distance, a shadow that didn't belong to wind or snow. She felt it immediately. The residue of attention. Someone had known they were coming, had perhaps tracked them. "Keep him between us," she instructed, "and stay alert." Mateo, Tomas, and Hale adjusted positions instinctively, forming a protective formation around Tobias and her. Even the faintest sign of threat registered with her in a physical pulse, a mental alert system honed over years of danger. The shadow shifted, a vehicle, a person, hard to tell in the dim light of pre-dawn. She squinted, trying to parse the motion. "Too far to engage," she murmured, "but close enough to complicate if we stop." Minutes stretched. The vehicle slowed slightly, engines muted under her command. The team moved with precision. Every breath counted. Every step, every click of a buckle or strap was a potential risk. Yet the ridge, the cold, the isolation, they were allies now. They masked them, they covered them, they whispered warnings in ways only trained soldiers could hear. Tomas whispered beside her, "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it, risking everything for someone who might not even remember you?" She turned slightly, eyes soft but determined. "It's not about them remembering, it's about me remembering. If I forget, then it's all lost." He nodded, silent, understanding the weight she carried. The checkpoint came into view, manned lightly by soldiers who hadn't been expecting this particular extraction. Their eyes flicked to the vehicle, then back to their stations. Standard procedure. Routine. Complacent. She exhaled silently. Routine was the perfect veil. Hale tapped her arm gently. "You want me to speak or?" "No," she said. "Let them assume." Her voice carried the calm finality of someone who had walked through death and back without looking for credit. The vehicle passed through the checkpoint, a faint crunch of snow and gravel beneath the tires. A guard's flashlight swung past them, a brief flicker illuminating Tobias's face. He stirred slightly, eyes half opening, confusion mingling with recognition. She leaned closer, whispering, "You're safe now, that's all you need to know." He blinked slow, hesitant. The muscles of his jaw loosened as relief washed through him. Not words, just comprehension. Alive, rescued, found. The ridge gave way to flatter terrain. Dawn was breaking fully now, pale light stretching across frozen land. It was serene, deceptive in its calm, yet for her it was a moment of reprieve, a pause before the next challenge. The team moved quietly, extracting efficiently. Tobias leaned lightly against her shoulder for support, a silent acknowledgement that he was dependent now. Not weakness, she reminded herself. Survival was often mistaken for weakness by those who hadn't endured. As the vehicle carried them further, she reflected on the moral weight of her choices. She had acted alone. She had withheld information. She had risked protocol and the safety of the team, yet every decision had been guided by the same principle. Some debts must be repaid quietly, without recognition, without applause. She looked at her team, Mateo checking instruments, Tomas scanning the rear, Hale focused but relaxed now, and allowed herself the smallest smile. Not relief, not pride, just acknowledgement. They had survived this leg, together, and she had delivered what she had promised, no matter how long it had taken. A crackle of static on the comms reminded her the world above was still watching. Command would want reports, explanations, justifications, but she remained silent, letting the moment linger. Some things didn't need to be documented. Some victories were theirs alone to carry. Finally, the transport reached a safer zone, the hum of engines quieting. She guided Tobias down the ramp carefully, keeping him close, keeping the team close. Frost burned their faces, but the cold was nothing compared to the weight they had left behind below. She paused, looking back toward the ridge. The complex was now distant, obscured by terrain and snow. Its secrets remained intact, but the debt had been addressed. The truth had been faced, the reckoning carried out. Tomas, stepping beside her, broke the silence. "Do you ever think it ends?" She didn't answer immediately. She considered it, letting the wind carry away the words she didn't need to say. Finally, she murmured, "No, not really. But you learn that some chapters close quietly, and that's enough." Hale nodded beside her. Tobias's weak but steady steps were testament enough. Mateo looked toward the horizon, a faint smile of relief crossing his face. The sun broke fully over the ridge now, light spilling across the frozen landscape, gilding their boots, their tracks, the path they had carved. It didn't celebrate them. It simply existed, and in that she found something akin to peace. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, and in that action she had done everything she could. The world was still watching, still unaware, still demanding. But for this moment, this small, stolen moment, they had survived, and that was enough. Why did the quiet feel heavier after survival? They had crossed the ridge, left the complex behind, and yet the air around them pressed in, dense with memory and unspoken questions. The snow beneath their boots whispered faintly as they moved toward the rendezvous point, carrying Tobias carefully between them. His breathing was steady but shallow, a fragile reminder that survival was never simple. Vega walked beside him, eyes forward, scanning the horizon despite the pale daylight. It was deceptive, the light. It promised safety, but experience had taught her better. Threats lingered in ways you couldn't predict, shapes in shadows, silence in radio chatter, hesitation in someone you trusted. Mateo followed with instruments in hand, monitoring vital signs and environmental readings, while Tomas flanked the other side, every muscle taut. Hale stayed slightly behind, eyes scanning rear and flank, a silent sentinel. "You think they'll follow?" Tomas asked, voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. Vega didn't answer immediately. She felt the echo of presence, faint, deliberate watchers who had tracked them, waited for mistakes, counted on hesitation. "Maybe," she said finally. "But if they do, they'll need to be smarter than they've shown so far." Tomas exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. She wasn't speaking bravado. She was speaking fact. She had been trained to notice what others dismissed. Every small shift in the environment, every subtle cue, every displaced particle of snow, it told her what maps and intel could not. They reached the rendezvous point, a narrow plateau where a stealth extraction vehicle waited, half hidden by terrain. The driver was ready, but the vehicle offered little comfort. It was armored, efficient, but cold, sterile, impersonal. Safe, but not home. Vega helped Tobias into the vehicle first. He settled into the seat with a strange mix of relief and disbelief, eyes scanning the interior as if confirming he was truly out of the shadows. She followed, taking the seat opposite him, keeping her hand near the small pack where she carried a few essentials: med supplies, comm gear, and a personal item she rarely touched. The vehicle rumbled to life. Tires crushed snow in muffled thumps. The wind outside became a distant hum, and the faint vibration beneath her feet was a reminder that even moving forward carried risk. Hale sat beside Mateo, scanning the route ahead. "Command's going to want to report," he said softly, as if testing the waters. Vega ignored him. Reports were meaningless in this context. Words could twist reality, hide the subtle victories, or overshadow the truth of what had just been done. She focused instead on Tobias, on the fragility of the life she had pulled back from the abyss. "You saved me," he whispered after a while, voice barely audible. I thought." "You didn't," she cut in gently, "and that's why you're here." He blinked slowly, comprehension slowly rising through the fog of years spent hidden. He tried to speak again, but Vega shook her head. "Not now. The moment was delicate. Words could break it. Silence was safer, clearer, truer." Outside, the plateau receded, giving way to open terrain. The wind carried distant sounds, bird calls, ice cracking under weight, the faint hum of far-off activity. Every sound was magnified in her awareness, every movement a potential warning. She leaned back, letting her senses scan the periphery, while Tobias's small, fragile presence reminded her why vigilance was never optional. "You could have told command," Tomas murmured beside her, "kept them in the loop, saved." "No," she interrupted quietly. Her eyes didn't leave the window. "They wouldn't understand, not this, not why it mattered. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't come with approval." Tomas nodded slowly. He had learned over missions and quiet nights that some decisions were beyond discussion. Some actions belonged to the moment, and only the person who bore them carried the weight. Mateo checked Tobias's vitals again. Pulse stable, breathing regular, temp rising slowly. He's going to make it. Vega's eyes softened, but only slightly. Relief was private, vulnerability even smaller. She didn't allow herself the luxury of joy. Not yet. Not until every step of this mission was complete. The vehicle slowed as they approached the extraction point. It was guarded lightly, enough to recognize a legitimate convoy, not enough to alert anyone with ill intent. Vega's eyes swept the perimeter. Routine procedures were their best disguise. Composure was their armor. They disembarked swiftly, Tobias leaning lightly on her. Every step she took was calculated, measured, precise. They moved like shadows, careful not to announce themselves to a world that didn't need to know their victory. Once clear of the immediate area, she allowed herself a fraction of pause. The wind lifted snow into delicate arcs around them, sunlight refracting off frozen surfaces. Tobias inhaled deeply, eyes wide, absorbing the sky, the land, the freedom he had not felt in years. She watched him, and for a moment the weight of what she had carried, the secrets, the guilt, the debt, settled into quiet satisfaction. Not triumph, not pride, just the acknowledgement that she had done what was necessary. Hale glanced at her. "You're not going to tell anyone what happened, are you?" She shook her head. "Some stories aren't theirs to hear." The ride back to base was long. She kept Tobias close, scanning continuously, alert for threats that might emerge from the periphery. Silence dominated the cabin, but it was filled with thought, reflection, memory. The team had survived, and yet the real world awaited. The reports, the briefings, the questions, none of it mattered as much as the quiet triumph of action without recognition. By the time they reached the secured perimeter of the base, Tobias's steps were stronger, steadier. Mateo, Tomas, and Hale helped him through the gates. Security scanners and automated checkpoints beeped routine codes, unaware of the narrative quietly unfolding within their machines. Once inside the safe zone, she finally allowed herself a moment to look at him properly. Tobias's face reflected gratitude, relief, disbelief, and something else. Trust, fragile but present. "You're safe now," she said softly, "and that's all that matters." He nodded slowly, and in that small gesture, she felt the closure she had carried for years settle into place. The team gathered their gear, voices low, reflective. No words could convey the full weight of what they had endured. Some stories were lived, not spoken. Some debts were repaid in action, not proclamation. She lingered a moment longer, scanning the perimeter one last time before stepping back into the folds of routine. Tobias walked beside her, steady, alive, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't start with survival and end with loss. And as the sun rose fully over the horizon, painting the base in gold and pale blue, she understood the truth she had always known. Dignity doesn't demand witnesses. It doesn't seek applause. It exists quietly in choices made, debts repaid, lives preserved. Sometimes all you can do is act, and trust that your action, even if unseen, is enough. The morning stretched ahead of them, endless and unbroken. The mission wasn't over, but this chapter, the reckoning, the retrieval, the act of unseen valor, was complete. And in the hush of early light, she allowed herself a private acknowledgement. The world had not noticed, but she had, and that had always been enough. How do you measure the weight of silence? The base was quiet now, subdued in the aftermath of a mission that no one fully understood. Tobias had been settled into medical observation, under careful watch but free from immediate danger. Vega walked the perimeter alone for a moment, letting the cold morning wind sweep across her face, carrying away tension, carrying away ghosts, but never enough to remove them entirely. She felt every footprint she had left behind, every secret carried, every choice made in shadows, every debt she had honored. Each one weighed like stone pressed against her shoulders, yet each one was hers to bear. No medals would mark them. No reports would record the careful reckoning she had performed. That was the way of things. That was the way she had always known it would be. Tomas approached, boots crunching softly on frost-hardened gravel. He stopped a few feet away, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, eyes hesitant. "Do you ever feel like it's too much?" he asked quietly. "All of it, the risk, the silence, the responsibility." Vega didn't answer immediately. She looked out over the horizon where pale sunlight touched the edges of distant ridges, soft and unforgiving. "It's never too much," she said finally. "It's just necessary. He nodded slowly, as if accepting that some truths were not meant to be dissected. Some acts existed only to be carried, not explained. And Tobias? Her gaze shifted inward. Tobias was recovering inside, unaware of the full scope of the risks, the history, the careful orchestration of events that had brought him back from oblivion. He had survived. He had been found, and he would live. That alone was enough for now. Alive, she said simply, that's all that matters. The morning grew brighter, the frost melting under the faint warmth of the sun. The base stirred with routine, guards shifting, machinery humming, voices echoing faintly across open spaces. Vega moved with the rhythm of someone who had just crossed an invisible threshold, her body alert but her mind slightly lighter, not unburdened, just aware that the debt carried had been repaid. Mateo and Hale approached from the inner compound. The air between them was careful, respectful. No questions, no congratulations, just acknowledgement. She understood this well. Action didn't need recognition. It required only completion. Extraction successful, Mateo said softly, voice almost swallowed by the wind. No interference, Tobias stable. Vega nodded, barely glancing at him. It was fact, not praise. Facts were sufficient. They carried more weight than accolades ever could. Hale's gaze lingered for a moment, watching her scan the horizon again. "You've done it before," he murmured, almost to himself. "Saved people, carried debts, stayed silent." "Yes," she said, "and I will again if necessary. But this was the last one I promised myself I would see through." The sun climbed higher, golden light catching the frost, reflecting in the crystalline air. Vega inhaled, letting the cold sharpness fill her lungs. A moment of clarity, fleeting and fragile. She had survived missions that others thought impossible. She had navigated moral landscapes that were darker than any battlefield. And she had acted when the world demanded nothing of her but obedience. Tomas stepped closer. "What now?" She let silence answer first. Then she said, "We return, we resume duty. We keep walking the line, but the debts, the personal ones, those are ours alone." He understood. They didn't need to speak further. Some knowledge was shared without words. Some victories were carried quietly in the spaces between duty and conscience. Inside the base, Tobias stirred, his faint movements pulling her thoughts back to him. He was safe, alive, and unaware of the full scope of the reckoning that had delivered him to this moment. That innocence, that fragile hope, made the cost worthwhile. She thought of all the missions, all the silent actions that had gone unrecorded. Each one had demanded pieces of her she could not reclaim. Each one had left scars, invisible but enduring. And yet in this quiet dawn she allowed herself a single acknowledgement. The burden she carried was worth it. Every life saved, every promise honored, every debt repaid. It was the only measure that mattered. Vega stepped outside again, alone this time, letting the wind sweep over her face. Frost dusted her hair, gloved hands pressed lightly against her chest. She closed her eyes, listening to the world moving on, oblivious to the quiet heroism that had occurred, yet shaped irrevocably by it. Sometimes, she thought, the world never notices, but that doesn't mean the action isn't seen. The ridge had witnessed her courage. The shadows had borne her reckoning. And Tobias, alive and breathing, was the proof that dignity, even unseen, had its own language. A raven called from the distant ridge, harsh and solitary. She watched it glide above the frozen trees, and in that fleeting movement she saw a reflection of herself, alone in purpose, unheralded in action but persistent. Her mind traced the path back through every choice, every careful step. The extraction, the hidden corridors, the years of waiting, the secrets she carried, they converged here in the fragile space of morning light. She allowed herself a breath she hadn't taken in years, a quiet, private acknowledgement of all she had endured, all she had preserved. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, and those acts, though invisible to the untrained eye, echo louder than words ever could. The base stirred fully now. Voices carried faintly over open spaces. Vehicles started, soldiers moved, schedules resumed. Vega watched for a long moment, breathing deeply, steady. The mission, the reckoning, the debts, they were all concluded. And in the stillness that followed, she finally allowed herself to feel something beyond vigilance or duty. The quiet satisfaction of having acted rightly, when no one was watching, in a world that rarely paused to notice. The snow began to melt in scattered rivulets along the perimeter, sunlight reflecting off each droplet. She watched them, meditative, thinking that even the smallest shifts, trickles of water, the rise of a heartbeat, the life saved, mattered more than accolades ever could. Vega turned to face her team, their shadows long in the pale morning light. Tomas met her gaze, silent understanding passing between them. Mateo and Hale were nearby, calm, alert, acknowledging the quiet closure in their own ways. And Tobias, fragile yet alive, gave a small, unsteady smile, the kind that didn't need words, that carried gratitude, hope, and trust all at once. She allowed herself one small nod, a subtle recognition that what had been done was enough. The ridge, the complex, the shadows, the debt, they all remained, but she had acted. She had honored the unseen. She had preserved dignity without expectation. And in that, she found the only reward worth seeking. Sometimes the world doesn't see. Sometimes no one applauds, and yet the act itself endures. Vega exhaled one last time into the crisp air, feeling the weight lift slightly, the burden redistributed, the debt repaid. A single raven circled overhead again, wings wide, gliding effortlessly. She watched it until it became a dot against the pale sky. The quiet stretched, unbroken, reflective, and she understood finally that this quiet, unheralded triumph was enough. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and those acts, even unseen, change everything.